Hello everybody, it's Jeff Rich here from the Burning Archive, and in a moment I'm going to bring you part 2 of my extended interview with Professor Michael Jabara Carley on his book Stalin's Great Game, about the response of the Soviet Union in the years 1939 to 1941. This part of the interview takes us from the strange defeat of France through the puzzling failure of Stalin to respond to all the warnings he received, including some of his most talented generals, that Germany, far from being his friend, was coming for him. And of course, the ultimate outcome of that was the dreadful failure of Operation Barbarossa. Please enjoy this extraordinary interview, and you can find links to Michael's works in the video description below. The full interview, the whole 2.5-hour interview, is going to be available at my Substack for paid subscribers as of the release of this video on YouTube. So please go over there if you want to watch it all without ads and without all that annoying algorithmic interference. Please enjoy, and I will give you a little foretaste of the next part at the end of the video. People in France are rejoicing, and this is following Munich in January 1939. They're rejoicing about the Munich settlement. To them, the enemy is the Jew and his ally, the Russian. Many people would sooner see Hitler come into France and restore order than leave things as they are. And I guess they got their wish pretty soon after, in 1940, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
But yeah, in 1940, France does fall to Germany's blitzkrieg, leading to Mark Bloch's strange defeat. Churchill replaces Chamberlain as British PM, and Britain starts to be besieged. I'm not exactly sure when the bombing of Britain begins, but, you know, things are looking tough. I can't quite remember when Dunkirk is either. But how are Stalin and the Soviet foreign policy and military leadership assessing this situation? I mean, they've have a non-aggression pact with Germany, and Germany has just knocked out France in like a matter of weeks and is bombing Britain. How are they judging the situation at this point?
With respect to the fall of France?
And I guess their expectation of whether Germany is going to come after them. But yeah, what's their reaction first to the fall of France?
Well, you know, before the fall of France, the Soviet side wasn't too worried about Germany turning against them. In fact, there were trade negotiations that went on, and trade agreements were concluded between the Soviet Union and Germany. And this was, you know, the period of the drôle de guerre, the phony war, where there was no fighting going on the Western Front. And one of the advantages that the French and the British saw about the Winter War in Finland was that they could move the fighting against Germany from you know, Western Europe into Scandinavia, and drag Norway and Sweden into the war, which would eventually be a war against Germany and Scandinavia, and would allow the French and the British to send troops to Finland. But when the phony war ended in early April of 1940, everything began to change. You know, Denmark was occupied with scarcely a shot fired. There was, you know, the Germans invaded Norway, and the British and the French botched their defense of of Norway and Norwegian ports that they sought to occupy. And then, the Germans invaded France, Belgium, Holland, and France fell apart. The Germans sent their forces across the Ardennes forests, where the French didn't expect them to attack. They broke through French lines and broke into open French territory and moved north to cut off French and British swords and British forces, which were stationed in northeastern France and in Belgium, which eventually led to the evacuation of Dunkirk. And France collapsed in 6 weeks, and it was a shock to the Soviet side. Nikita Khrushchev, in his memoirs, remembered having a conversation with Stalin and other colleagues while this was going on. And Khrushchev remembered that Stalin began to swear like a taxi driver and saying things like, "What the hell? Couldn't the French fight a little bit more effectively than that? And what the hell happened to the British? How could they have been beaten so easily?" The collapse of France and the near collapse of Britain at that point changed everything for the Soviet side and made them feel very vulnerable to a possible attack from the German side. And we already talked about this in an earlier session that we had. But Soviet intelligence immediately began to pick up the movement of once the war in France was over, began to pick up the movement of large numbers of German troops towards Soviet frontiers. From the Soviet point of view, the fall of France was a catastrophe.
Coming back to our good friends Perfidious Albion, right. In this crisis, Britain sends the very English named Sir Stafford Cripps on a mission to Moscow to warn the Soviet Union, in fact, that Nazi Germany may invade to the east. As we discussed previously, trust was very low between Britain and the Soviet Union, as perhaps made evident there by Stalin's remark to Khrushchev. There'd been decades of rebuffs and hostilities and the failure to form an alliance. How did Stafford Cripps's mission go?
Well, with France falling apart and the British lucky to get their soldiers, most of them out of Dunkirk, he got them out. The British got them out, but the soldiers were naked when they got back to Britain. They'd left all their war material, tanks, trucks, everything they'd left in Dunkirk. And they had nothing to fight with. And the only thing that was protecting, well, there were two things that were protecting Britain that the French didn't have. One was the English Channel, which was formed a kind of a defensive moat for the British. And the other, as events would prove, was the Royal Air Force, which was able to beat back the Nazi blitzkrieg against Britain, which began during summer 1940. The way Stalin looked at this was the French were out of it, and nobody knew what was going to happen with the British. Were the British going to be able to survive? And amongst the bookies in London, they were taking bets on when a invasion of Britain would take place. Maisky went to see Churchill, who became prime minister in May, and he wanted to know if Churchill thought the British could hold out, and Churchill said to Maisky, "Beyond 3 months, I can't tell you what's going to happen." And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when Churchill was talking with Maisky, he described his policy as KBO, keep buggering on, and hope for the best. And so getting back to Stafford Cripps, he was sent to Moscow in June of 1940 to try to improve relations with the Soviet Union and eventually get them onto the side of the British. But Stafford Cripps he wasn't trying to play the role of perfide Albion. He tried to play an honest role with the Soviet side, and he made the arguments in favor of better Anglo-Soviet relations. But if you were Stalin and the Soviet leadership looking at the situation in the summer of 1940, you didn't know whether the British were going to hold out. And if the British couldn't hold out, you sure as hell weren't going to try to pursue a rapprochement with them, which Hitler would regard as an unfriendly act.
Mm.
And
so it's like
part of that
attaching yourself to a drowning man, sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Stalin wasn't stupid. He wasn't going to stick his neck out if the British couldn't survive. And Cripps was not stupid. But he really didn't. I don't think he really got it. That the main problem in his attempts to get on better with the Soviet side was the weakness of Great Britain.
Mm. So does this explain why Stalin didn't believe Germany would turn against him at this point? That he believed?
Oh no!
That what how? I mean, like, Britain's been bombed; it's on its knees. There must be some suspicion. Presumably, there's intelligence coming into the Soviet Union at the same time as well. How has this been assessed in the Soviet leadership?
Yeah, there was one thing I didn't tell you about the conversation which Khrushchev reported upon, and that was Stalin's conclusion after he cursed the British and the French for failing to defend themselves. He said to his colleagues, now Hitler's going to turn around and beat our brains out.
Okay. Yeah. So he kind of knew, but his options for action perhaps were limited. Maybe. I mean, I guess if
he thought that the Red Army would need to have 2 more years of peace in order to face successfully German invasion. And so basically, Stalin begins to pursue a policy of appeasement, which he condemned the French, which he had condemned the French and the British for earlier on before the war, before the invasion of Poland in September 1939.
So he's sort of playing for time from a position of weakness in a way. Yeah.
He's exactly playing for time. I mean, the Soviet High Command looked at the experience of the Finnish War and saw real problems in Soviet war making abilities, and recognized that they had to make changes, but those changes couldn't be made overnight, and they needed to develop a new fighter aircraft, new tanks, new anti-aircraft weaponry, all sorts of things, new strategies for dealing with with the Wehrmacht. They had a big job in front of them, and so the policy became stall.
Yeah, that makes
not because
sense.
not because they thought that they could get along with Hitler, but because they needed time to get ready for war with Hitler.
Yeah. And then I guess the question then becomes whether, what you said at the outset about, Stalin's the last one to be convinced that Germany is going to invade. Perhaps he's overestimating his ability to stall. But throughout 1940, it's not just Soviet intelligence, it's the intelligence of lots of countries working overtime, sort of weighing up everyone's intentions. And indeed, in November 1940, Vyacheslav Molotov goes to Berlin specifically to try to improve Soviet-German relations, perhaps, as you say, to stall, to buy a little bit more time, but also presumably to investigate any suspicions. You say in the book that this trip provoked, quote, alarm, irritation and anxiety in Britain. How did it go from a Soviet perspective?
In my opinion, Stalin sent Molotov to Berlin on an exploratory mission to find out where things were at with the Germans. They were messing around in the Baltic countries and threatening Turkey, looked to be threatening Turkey, and the Soviet side didn't like that, and wanted the Germans to stop. And the Germans, had this idea that the Soviet side should go and tackle the British Empire in Afghanistan and India and so forth and so on, which Molotov and Stalin thought was a ridiculous idea. Their ambitions and their concerns were essentially about Soviet security around the Black Sea and in Romania and Bulgaria and the Turkish Straits. And the conclusion that they drew from the discussions with Hitler was that no immediate agreement with the Germans was possible, and that they'd have to be on their guard. And at the same time, they were getting swamped with intelligence coming from everywhere in Europe and from Asia as well, that preparations were being made to invade the Soviet Union. Stalin didn't want to believe it, of course. He thought that these reports of Nazi preparations for invasion were disinformation. He thought that Hitler wouldn't be so stupid as to launch a two-front war against the Soviet Union while Britain was still in the fight, and not knowing what the eventual position of the United States would be. And so he thought he was smarter than, I'm being a little sarcastic here. I hope I can be forgiven for that.
Absolutely.
Stalin thought he knew better than his own generals. And he didn't believe the information he was getting. And I have a quotation here. It's a report, a dispatch that the Soviet military attaché in Berlin sent to Moscow. And the military attaché's name was Vasily Ivanovich Tupikov. He's kind of an interesting guy because after the war starts in June of 1940, he volunteers for frontline service, and he was killed in action in the fighting around Kiev in September of 1941. He's kind of an interesting guy, and this report will give you an idea of how perceptive he was in observing German military preparations for the invasion of the Soviet Union. So I'll just quote a couple of paragraphs here. Since my arrival here 3.5 months ago, I have sent to you 150 telegrams and several tens of written reports on various topics of varying degrees of credibility and value. But they are all small parts of an answer to the basic question. Do the Germans have in their policy and strategy, not just in a general way, but in concrete terms, a war with us? A war with us. And what is the timetable for the beginning of a possible confrontation? And in this context, what will it look like? I cited a number of dispatches. Don't think that I believe that this flood of reports simply means a good job, but in the study of all this evidence, which has become available over these last 3.5 months, I've come to the definite conclusion, which I am reporting to you. If my cited conclusions seem like crashing through an open door, it doesn't discourage me. If I am mistaken in this, then you will correct me, and I will be most grateful. What General Tupikov concluded was that Germany intended to attack soon, to invade the Soviet Union. And this warning was sent from Tupikov to Moscow in March of 1941.
Indeed, as we learnt in March 1941, Hitler was revving up his generals to prepare for, a racist war of conquest and annihilation. So it was very timely, and it's interesting too. I mean, I did an interview with Richard Overy about his book Why War, which explores the different motivations or explanations for why wars happen, and the extent to which belief or a search of power or money, resources, or the sort of realist rational actor ideas around security and that sort of thing, how much they play a part. And one of his observations was you can't really explain Hitler's decisions entirely within World War II, within a rationalist, framework. And maybe that was Stalin's mistake. He was saying, well, it's not rational for Hitler to attack at this point or to open a two-front war. And he perhaps undervalued the extent to which Hitler was motivated by these, these beliefs about the Russians and the Slavs and the Soviet Union as well. Your dark triad of fascism, anti-Semitism, and anti-communism.
Right, but in my analysis of the intelligence reports coming into Moscow, some of those reports said very clearly, and this is an answer to the argument that Stalin mounted about Hitler not being stupid enough to launch a two-front war. The intelligence some of the intelligence that was coming into Moscow said very clearly that the German side discounted the British, that they were incapable of threatening Germany and the West, and that they need not worry about a two-front war, that they could, because of the weakness of Britain, they were free to attack the Soviet Union, that the issue of a two-front war was not key. And that information was in the reports that Stalin was getting. Why didn't he listen to those? Why didn't he pay attention to those reports? There's no explanation for it. I basically asked my readers, here is a very large sample of the intelligence reports that Stalin and his colleagues were getting about the Nazi buildup on Soviet frontiers. What do you think he should have done? How would you have reacted to receiving these reports? And my conclusion is that Stalin was living in another universe, or I don't know where the hell he was, or how desperate he was feeling about the weakness of the Red Army in face of an attack in June of 1941 by the Wehrmacht and the German armed forces. But there's another thing. I remember a very interesting letter from Litvinov. We haven't talked very much about him this time, but just to remind listeners, he was the foreign commissar for a long time and was sacked by Stalin in May 1939. Stalin was having an argument with the German ambassador in Moscow. It was 1936. And they were talking about the possible threat of Germany to Soviet security. And Litvinov said something like this to the ambassador. He said, well, if I get a bunch of reports, intelligence reports saying that the Germans are going to invade me, and I get one report saying that they're not going to invade, what's my best option? Should I believe the one report that says that we're not in danger, or should I believe all the other reports that say we are and get ready for it?
Yeah. And I guess he believed the one report. He believed the one in a million chance kind of thing.
That's right. And, there's a lot of debate between historians about why Hitler did what he did. He was afraid of, he didn't think the Red Army was ready to fight. But when is an army ever ready to make war? That, the war is always full of the unexpected. And and a smart soldier will always try to to find an alternative to launching war, if they're wise.
Mm.
And
But I guess Hitler's sort of mindset was that sort of triumph of the will kind of, I'm going to seize the initiative kind of thing here. Maybe I will assert my dominance. I
yeah,
sniff weakness in the Soviet Union. Maybe I don't. I'm just speculating here, but yeah.
well, what he's basically, he laid it all out in Mein Kampf. He said
Yeah.
that the Soviet Union was run by a bunch of incompetent Jews, and that if you knock out the Jews and you knock out the Bolsheviks, the whole edifice of the Soviet Union would collapse overnight. They were easy pickings. They would be he thought they could be defeated in 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And the shocking thing is that that's exactly what British and American intelligence also thought.
Which brings us back to Britain as well, I guess, over across on the other side of Europe there. In 1941, as all this is happening, there's some attempts, I guess, diplomacy with Maisky in Britain to build relations. But this same dilemma of maybe not wanting to be attached to what they perceive as a weak ally might be in play there. And in your book, you quote former Prime Minister Lloyd George. I think, is this in a conversation maybe with a Russian diplomat, or it's in an intelligence report reporting on this conversation? And I'll just read it. I'll read it for you if you like.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Lloyd George in this conversation says, Winston has become a prisoner of the Conservative Party and is swimming with the current. I've already said to you more than once that I see only one way to win a decisive victory over Germany, and that is to draw the USSR to our side. However, this is exactly what the British government does not want. It desperately fears the consequences of such an alliance on the internal life of the country. Better to lose the war than open the road to Bolshevism. The interests of the nation are colliding with class prejudices, and the latter were prevailing. Now, I think that's the Soviet side's interpretation of Lloyd George comments, perhaps.
Right.
But what does that reveal about what's going on in Britain, what's going on in the Soviet Union?
Well, this whole, there's this great fear amongst the elites of Europe about war as a instrument for the spread of revolution, socialist or communist revolution in Europe. And the idea is, well, if you look at what happened in Russia, the Russian Revolution, the war in Russia during the First World War led to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and the establishment of the Soviet Union. And another war in Europe would lead to the spread of communist regimes in the rest of Europe. And so that war had to be avoided at all costs, and B, there should never be an alliance with the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany. And since we're talking about quotations, I have one from that comes from the Foreign Office. The Foreign Office in July of 1941, a few weeks after war breaks out against the Soviet Union, and it's by a Foreign Office official by the name of Reginald a leaper. Here's what he writes. This is July 1941. The Russian Revolution was the most arresting event of the last war. Russian resistance to Germany, now, he's saying, may prove the most arresting event in this war. Hitherto, the Battle of Britain last autumn has been the epic of this war, but it may well be dimmed by the much greater battle now in progress between Germany and Russia, a battle on which so much depends and which we are playing no significant part in the eyes of Europe. The Russians may, in fact, put us completely in the shade. The hopes of many millions of people rest on the success of Russian armies. Since a fortnight ago, there has been something of a revolution in men's minds. Stalin had come on. He is, in fact, making a bid for European leadership. If he repels the German attack, this leadership will become a most important factor in Europe. It will be said that Russia alone could defeat Germany. The Russian mystique will revive everywhere. And that's what happened. In fact, contrary to McMeekin and Snyder and all those other folks that run around with them.
Yeah, and very, very popular sort of discourse on YouTube and social media, etc. We'll turn to Operation Barbarossa in a second, but just as a way of just concluding this, this enigma. I mean, when I say enigma, I should mention that in your book you actually include a discussion of one message that was passed on about likely Soviet invasion via the famous enigma. The sort of the way in which the British cracked the code with Alan Turing involved and all that sort of thing, which is a fascinating story in itself. But the chapter where you sort of kind of sum up Stalin's sort of failure to respond to all the warning signs you describe as the ostrich that never looked up. So maybe just before, as you say, there is this debate about it all. What's your final judgment, I guess, on how Stalin got to be in the position where he made this catastrophic misjudgment? What does it tell us about both Stalin and Soviet foreign policy?
Well, the first cliche that comes to mind is that intelligence is only as good as the people who are reading it and interpreting it. And Stalin, Stalin was the boss. He was the Gosudar, the Russian Gosudar. You couldn't mess around with him if you went against his wishes. Experience taught that one of the jokes going around at the time was that if you weren't careful with Stalin, you could join Tukhachevsky's command staff. Tukhachevsky, of course, had been executed by Stalin in 1937. So the joke was that you would end up joining the dead Tukhachevsky. You just didn't screw around with Stalin. He was the boss. He was the commander-in-chief. He was responsible for large decisions and small decisions as well. And he was the boss. He was the top man. His word was law. And it took a lot of guts from somebody like Tupikov to write those reports that he did to Moscow. He's not mentioned a lot in the historiography of Russian historiography, but maybe historians should pay more attention to him and his efforts in Berlin to warn Moscow what was coming. But Stalin was a boss. He was responsible. And so, if he screwed up, he was responsible for screwing up. And, he admitted a couple days after the war had begun, he was in a meeting with some of his colleagues, and he said something like, we've screwed up big time. He used the word we, we have, as though it wasn't all his fault. Or maybe he used it as the royal we. In any event, he was a boss. It was his decision to not take seriously the intelligence coming in. And my argument in the book is that that basically my readers would inevitably draw the conclusion from reading the large sample that I provided to them of those reports. The only conclusion that one can draw is that Hitler's coming for me and I better get ready for him. It's not that Stalin did nothing to get ready, by the way, because there was a lot going on. There were new weapons systems being developed, new weapons factories being built. There was a lot of stuff going on, but wasn't enough. And Stalin wouldn't listen to his generals. Basically, that was it. He wouldn't listen. And the price that they paid for not listening was very high indeed.
I hope you enjoyed that video. Part 3 will take us through Operation Barbarossa and its catastrophic impact on not just Stalin, not just the Soviet leadership, but the people of the Soviet Union and indeed the world. And we will discuss that in part 3. Do head over to jeffrich.substack if you want to watch the full interview now. Support my work there as a paid subscriber, and I'll see you again real soon.